I was 22 years old when I married Ricardo Romero. He was 35, already successful, already powerful, already everything I thought I wanted to be. I was fresh out of Stanford with a double major in computer science and business administration. Top of my class, offers from Google and Microsoft sitting on my desk, and I chose him instead. I chose love. I chose partnership. I chose what I thought was going to be a life built together. 22 years later, on a Friday night in September, he introduced me to his potential investors from Singapore as Maria, his housekeeper. Not his wife, not his partner, not the woman who coded the original algorithm that made his company worth $400 million. Not the woman who sat beside him in their garage when they had nothing but a dream and a maxed-out credit card. Maria, the housekeeper. A woman who didn't even exist. I stood there in my Valentino dress, the one he had told me to wear because it was elegant but not too flashy, the one that cost $8,000, and I smiled. I shook their hands. I spoke to them in perfect Mandarin about the weather in Singapore, about the gardens at Marina Bay, about how I had always wanted to visit. And they looked at me with that polite confusion, that slight embarrassment, wondering why the help was speaking to them as equals, wondering why the help was even at the table. Ricardo didn't correct himself. He didn't stammer or laugh it off as a joke. He just let it sit there in the air between us. That lie, that erasure of everything I was and everything I had done. He ordered another scotch, and started talking about projected earnings for the next fiscal quarter. I excused myself to the restroom. I locked myself in a stall and I counted to 100. Then I counted to 100 again. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, at this woman in her designer dress and her perfect hair and her careful makeup, and I didn't recognize her anymore. When had I become invisible? When had I agreed to disappear? I walked out of that restaurant. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't make a scene. I simply walked out into the Manhattan night. And I kept walking until my feet hurt in my stupid expensive heels. Then I took off the heels, and I kept walking barefoot on the cold September pavement, until I reached our penthouse on the Upper East Side. I poured myself a glass of wine. Then I poured myself another. Then I sat down at my laptop, the laptop I hadn't opened in months, because Ricardo said I didn't need to work anymore, that my job was to support him, to be there for him, to make sure his life ran smoothly, so he could focus on building the empire. Our empire, he used to say. Now it was just his. I started looking through files. Old files. Files from 1998, when we were two kids with an idea. Files with my handwriting all over them, with my code, with my signatures, with my blood and sweat and tears embedded in every line. I had been so careful back then, so methodical. I had documented everything. You see, when Ricardo and I started Techdyne Solutions, we were equal partners. 50-50. Everything was split down the middle. But somewhere around year 5, when the company started really taking off, Ricardo suggested a restructuring. He said it would be better for taxes, better for investor relations, better for a dozen reasons that made sense at the time. He said it was just paperwork, that nothing would really change between us. I trusted him. I signed papers. I transferred shares. I stepped back from the day-to-day operations, because we had our first child and someone needed to be home, and that someone, of course, was me. Little by little my 50% became 40%, then 30, then 20. Then I wasn't even on the board anymore. Then I was just Ricardo's wife, the woman who hosted the perfect dinner parties, and raised the perfect children and stayed perfectly quiet about how the entire foundation of his success was built on my work. But I had kept everything. Every email, every document, every piece of code with my digital fingerprint on it, every contract and agreement and memo. From those early days. I am many things, but careless is not one of them. I spent that entire night going through it all. By the time the sun came up over the East River, I had a plan. Ricardo came home at 3 in the morning, drunk and unapologetic. He found me still sitting at the kitchen counter with my laptop. "Where did you go?" he said. "You embarrassed me in front of the investors." "I embarrassed you," I said. "You just disappeared, Elena. What was I supposed to tell them?" "I don't know, Ricardo. Maybe you could have told them the truth, that I'm your wife, that I'm the person who built the algorithm your entire company is based on, that without me you'd still be working in your father's insurance office in New Jersey." He rolled his eyes. "This again? Yes, I said. This again. Elena, it was a mistake. I was nervous. I misspoke. You called me Maria. It was the first name that came to mind. We don't have a housekeeper named Maria. We don't have a housekeeper at all. We have a cleaning service that comes on Tuesdays and Thursdays and you don't even know any of their names. You're being dramatic. I'm being dramatic, I repeated. I stood up. I closed my laptop. I looked at my husband, this man I had loved for more than 2 decades, and I felt nothing. Just a vast emptiness where love used to be. I want a divorce, I said. He laughed. He actually laughed. You're upset, he said. Sleep it off, we'll talk in the morning. It is morning, I said. And I'm not upset, I'm done. I walked out of the kitchen. I went upstairs. I packed a bag. By the time he realized I was serious, I was already in a car heading to my sister's place in Brooklyn. That was the easy part. The hard part came next. I called my lawyer first thing Monday morning. Margaret Chen, the best divorce attorney in New York, a woman who had taken down hedge fund managers and real estate moguls and tech billionaires. She had handled my friend Patricia's divorce 3 years earlier and had walked away with 70% of everything. If anyone could help me, it was Margaret. We met at her office in Midtown. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes in her neat, precise handwriting. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at me with those sharp, dark eyes. Do you want to hurt him? She asked. Or do you want to destroy him? I thought about it. I thought about 22 years of being slowly erased, of being pushed to the margins of my own life, of watching my work and my accomplishments be attributed to someone else while I smiled and nodded and played the supportive wife. Destroy him, I said. Margaret smiled. Good. Then we're going to need to be strategic. A standard divorce won't be enough. He has lawyers. He has money. He has power. But you have something better. What? The truth. And documentation. I showed her everything. The files. The emails. The code. The original contracts. The paper trail that proved I had been instrumental in building Techdyne from the ground up, that my intellectual property was woven into the very fabric of the company, that I had been systematically pushed out and undercompensated. Margaret's smile grew wider as she went through it all. This is good, she said. This is very good. But if you really want to destroy him, we need to think bigger than just a divorce settlement. We need to make him lose everything. What do you mean? His company, his reputation, everything he's built on your back. Are you prepared to burn it all down? I thought about his face when he called me Maria. I thought about all the times he had introduced me as just his wife, never mentioning that I had a PhD from Stanford, that I had run the engineering team for the first 5 years, that the core technology that made Techdyne valuable was mine. I thought about the investors who had looked through me like I was invisible, like I was nothing. Yes, I said, burn it all down. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Ricardo's company was built on proprietary technology that I had developed and that I could prove I had developed. While I had signed over my shares in the company during the restructuring, I had never signed away my intellectual property rights to the original algorithms. That had been an oversight on the part of Ricardo's lawyers, a small detail that everyone had missed because they assumed the wife wouldn't dare challenge her husband. They assumed wrong. Margaret filed the divorce papers on a Wednesday. Standard stuff, irreconcilable differences, request for equitable distribution of marital assets. Ricardo's lawyer called it a nuisance suit, said I'd be lucky to get $5 million in alimony. They had no idea what was coming. On Thursday I filed a separate lawsuit. Not through Margaret, but through a different firm, a boutique intellectual property law firm in Boston that specialized in tech disputes. I claimed ownership of the core algorithm that powered Techdyne's flagship product. I had the documentation. I had the code with my digital signatures. I had emails from Ricardo himself acknowledging that I had developed it. I had everything. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the industry. Techdyne's stock price dropped 15% in a single day. Investors started asking questions. The board called an emergency meeting. Ricardo called me 37 times. I didn't answer. He showed up at my sister's apartment on Friday night. She opened the door and blocked his way. She doesn't want to see you, my sister said. This is insane, he shouted past her. Elena, you're destroying everything we built together. I came to the door then. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw the panic in his eyes. Good. No, Ricardo, I said. I'm destroying everything I built. You just put your name on it. You can't do this, the company will collapse. Our investors will walk, everything will be gone. Then you should have thought of that before you erased me. I didn't erase you. You're my wife. I was your wife. Now I'm your worst nightmare. Elena, please. We can work this out. I'll put you back on the board. I'll give you more shares. Whatever you want. I don't want your scraps, Ricardo. I want what's mine. What's yours? Everything in that company is because of me. My leadership, my vision, my work. Built on my foundation. Built on my code. Built on my ideas that you took credit for. That's not how anyone will see it. We'll let the courts decide. The courts. The lawsuit dragged on for weeks. During discovery, we uncovered even more than I had originally documented. Emails where Ricardo explicitly told investors that he had developed the technology himself. Presentations where he took credit for my work. Board meetings where he dismissed my contributions. It was damning. But Ricardo had resources. He hired the best lawyers money could buy. They started digging into my life, looking for any leverage they could find. They tried to paint me as a disgruntled housewife, as someone who had willingly stepped back from the company, and now wanted credit she hadn't earned. They brought in expert witnesses to testify that the code had been substantially modified over the years, that my original contribution was minimal. It might have worked, except for one thing. I hadn't been idle for the past 22 years. While I had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Techdyne, I had never stopped coding. In the quiet hours after the kids went to bed, in the early mornings before Ricardo woke up, I had kept working. I had kept innovating. I had developed newer, better versions of the original algorithm, versions that were faster and more efficient and more elegant. And I had documented everything, kept it all on encrypted servers that Ricardo knew nothing about. During one of the depositions, Ricardo's lawyer made a mistake. He suggested that I was technically incompetent, that I couldn't possibly understand the complex systems that Techdyne now employed. Margaret smiled when she heard that. The next day, we filed a motion to include my recent work in the evidence. The judge allowed it. I submitted 43 pages of code, algorithms that I had developed over the past 5 years, that improved on the original technology by a factor of 10. I included technical documentation, patent applications I had filed in my own name, everything. Ricardo's technical team looked at it. They brought in outside consultants. Every single one of them confirmed that not only was the work legitimate, it was revolutionary. It would make Techdyne's current technology obsolete. That's when Ricardo realized he was finished. The settlement talks began in earnest. Ricardo's lawyers offered me $50 million to drop the lawsuit and sign an NDA. I said no. They offered $100 million. I said no. They offered $150 million and a position as Chief Technology Officer. I said no. I don't want money, I told Margaret. I want the company. You want to take over Techdyne? No, I said. I want to sell it. She looked at me confused. If I prove ownership of the core IP, I said, then I effectively control the company's most valuable asset. Ricardo can't sell Techdyne without my permission, because any buyer would face the same lawsuit I'm bringing now. The company becomes worthless in his hands. So you force him to sell to you at a discount, Margaret said, understanding dawning on her face. Exactly. And then I sell it to someone else at market value. That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. I learned from the best, I said. I learned from him. We went back to court. The judge, a sharp woman in her 60s, who had clearly dealt with her share of powerful men trying to take credit for women's work, was sympathetic to my case. She ruled that yes, I had a valid claim to the intellectual property, and yes, Techdyne's use of my technology without proper compensation constituted copyright infringement. She put an injunction on the company, freezing all major business decisions until the ownership question was resolved. Techdyne's stock price went into free fall. Investors started jumping ship. The Singapore deal fell through. 3 board members resigned. Ricardo was drowning and there was no lifeline coming. He called me one night, 3 months after I had walked out of Le Bernardin. His voice was broken, defeated. Elena, he said, please, you're killing me. No, I said. I'm just making you feel what I felt every day for the past 22 years. Invisible. Erased. Like everything I did didn't matter. It mattered. You mattered. I was an idiot. I was worse than an idiot. I was cruel, I know that now. You only know it now because you're losing everything. If the investors had signed, if the company had kept growing, you'd still be introducing me as the help. That's not fair. Isn't it? Silence on the other end of the line. What do you want, Elena? Just tell me what you want, and it's yours. I want you to sell me the company. What? You heard me. Sell me Techdyne. I'll pay $1. That's insane. The company is worth 400 million. Not anymore, it's not. Right now it's worth nothing because of the injunction. But if you sell it to me, I can lift the injunction immediately. I can restore value. I might even be able to save some of the investor relationships. And what? You just walk away with everything I built. Everything we built, I corrected him. And yes, that's exactly what happens. I'll never agree to that. Then the company will die. I said simply, the lawsuit will drag on for years. The stock price will hit zero. Techdyne will go bankrupt. All those employees will lose their jobs. All those investors will lose their money. And you'll be remembered as the man who destroyed a $400 million company because of his own ego. Your choice. I hung up. 2 days later, his lawyer called Margaret. They wanted to talk. The negotiation was brutal. Ricardo fought for every penny, every clause, every word in the contract. He wanted money, he wanted stock options, he wanted a consulting position, he wanted his name to stay on the company. I said no to everything except one concession. I offered him $10 million. Not for the company itself, but as part of the divorce settlement. Split it however you want. I told him through the lawyers. Call it alimony. Call it a payout. Call it whatever helps you sleep at night. But that's all you're getting. In the end, he took it. What choice did he have? On a cold November morning, we met in a conference room in Manhattan and signed the papers. Techdyne Solutions was mine. All of it. The technology, the brand, the employees, the contracts, everything. Ricardo signed his name 37 times, and with each signature, I watched him die a little bit inside. When it was done, he looked at me across the table. I loved you, he said. No, I said. You loved what I could do for you. There's a difference. He left the conference room without another word. I never saw him again. Taking over Techdyne was easier than I expected. The employees, most of whom had known me from the early days, welcomed me back with open arms. The investors were skeptical at first, but when I presented them with my new algorithms, with the technology that would take the company to the next level, they were suddenly very interested in staying aboard. Within 2 months I had stabilized the stock price. Within 4 months I had signed 3 new major contracts. Within 6 months Techdyne was valued at $600 million, 50% higher than it had been under Ricardo's leadership. But I didn't want to run a company. That had never been the goal. The goal had been justice, and I had achieved that. Now I wanted something else. I wanted freedom. I called Margaret in June, 8 months after that fateful dinner at Le Bernardin. Find me a buyer, I said. Someone who will treat the employees well and keep the technology in good hands. And find them fast. She found me 3 potential buyers within 2 weeks. All of them were offering over $700 million. I chose the one who promised to keep all the current employees and to invest another $100 million in research and development. The deal closed in July. I walked away with $640 million after taxes and legal fees. Not bad for a housekeeper, but that wasn't the end. I still had one more thing to do. I had a box delivered to Ricardo's apartment on the Upper East Side. He had moved there after the divorce, a smaller place, only 3 bedrooms, a huge downgrade from our penthouse, but still nice by any reasonable standard. The $10 million I had given him was already running out, apparently. He had expensive taste and no income to support it anymore. The box was small, about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside was a flash drive. On the flash drive was a single document. A detailed breakdown of every contribution I had made to Techdyne over the years. Every line of code, every algorithm, every strategic decision, every hire, every fire, every meeting where I had come up with the solution that saved the company. It was hundreds of pages long, meticulously documented, cross-referenced with emails and memos and timestamps. It was the complete history of everything he had taken credit for, everything he had stolen from me, laid out in excruciating detail. At the end of the document was a single sentence. "This is what you called housework." Also in the box was a check. Made out to Ricardo Romero, for $1. The memo line read, "Payment in full for Techdyne Solutions. Thank you for your contribution." I heard from mutual friends that he opened the box on a Thursday evening, that he read through the entire document on his laptop, growing paler with each page, that he stared at the $1 check for a long time without moving. I also heard that he tried to call me 43 times that night. I didn't answer. I had already changed my number anyway. That was 3 months ago. Today I'm sitting in a cafe in Barcelona, drinking espresso and watching the sun set over the Mediterranean. I bought a small house here, nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms and a terrace with a view of the sea. I'm learning Spanish. I'm learning to paint. I'm learning who I am when I'm not defined by someone else's shadow. My children, who are now adults with their own lives, understand why I did what I did. My daughter told me she was proud of me. My son said it was about time I stood up for myself. They both cut their father out of their lives, not because I asked them to, but because they saw him clearly for the first time and didn't like what they saw. Ricardo, from what I hear, is living in a modest apartment in Queens. He tried to start another tech company, but couldn't get funding. Turns out investors don't trust men who lose $400 million companies in divorce settlements. He's consulting now, doing freelance work for startups, making maybe $200,000 a year. It's comfortable, but nothing like what he had before. Nothing like what we had before. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about that night at Le Bernardin. If he replays that moment in his mind, calling me Maria, watching me walk away. If he wishes he could take it back, do it all over differently. Treat me like a partner instead of an accessory. See me instead of looking through me. But probably not. Men like Ricardo rarely understand what they've lost until it's far too late, and even then they blame everyone but themselves. As for me, I'm finally free. Free from his shadow, free from his name, free from the weight of being invisible in my own life. I sold the company I built, destroyed the man who tried to erase me, and walked away with more money than I'll ever need. But the money isn't the point, it never was. The point is that I exist. I matter. My work matters, and no one will ever make me forget that again. I take another sip of my espresso and smile. Somewhere in Queens, Ricardo Romero is opening a box with a $1 check inside, realizing that everything he had was built on my back, and I'm here in Barcelona, finally living my own life. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. They're wrong. Revenge is a dish best served with a $1 check and a $640 million smile. And it tastes absolutely perfect.